Okay. Yeah. So hello everybody. I will put online share. So it is 3 o'clock, 3 minutes in Paris. So I have to say good night in Indonesia, the eastern part of the world this time, and then good evening in India. Well, good night in China, of course, but I think Tiguang is in UK, so it must be good afternoon also. And hello, everybody. So we will start. You see the program that we will discuss about the G20 presidency of Indonesia amid global crisis, what challenges and what hopes for a global future. And since we are supposed to be 13 speakers, I proposed that we follow the agora tradition of ancient Greece, where everybody speaks around 6 minutes. Or with Isaac, we agree to tolerate until 8 minutes maximum. Because if we multiplied 10 to 8, already 80 minutes. So we're supposed to have 1 hour maximum for the first round. So I will co-chair the session with Isaac. When I speak, Isaac will manage the technical aspect, and when Isaac speaks, I will manage the technical aspect. So the first speaker supposed to be from Indonesia, Koni Rahakundini Bakri, who is senior defense and military analyst based in Jakarta, but I don't see her in the room. And then followed by Yin Tiguang from China. And then I hope that Quan Xing Chen is there also. He is based in Taiwan. I saw this morning that he registered, but I don't know if he will be there. And after that, we will have Professor Manoranjan Mohanty from India. And then followed by Mazin Kumsieh, also professor at University of Bethlehem in Palestine. And then I saw here also Sifaman Lazondi, also professor of University of Johannesburg, South Africa. And followed by Tony Nwankwo Nwaichaigwe from, well, he is based in Rwanda, but his institution affiliation is University of Nigeria in Nsukka. And then we go to Europe, starting from Greece, Dimitris Konstantakopoulos, who is editor of Defend Democracy Press, based in Athens. And we have Dragana Mitrovic. We go to Serbia, a professor also in University of Belgrade. And then from Italy, we will have Paolo Motta, who is also architect, territorial planner, and researcher from Eurispes Bricks Lab, based in Rome. And then Professor Hans Kochler, from Austria, from University of Innsbruck, but now active in International Progress Organization based in Vienna. And then we go to Latin America. We will have Beatriz Bicio, who is based in Brazil, but originating from Uruguay. And then we hope that we will have also Pedro Vacaflor, who is journalist based in Cochabamba in Bolivia. So everybody 6 minutes. Now I will give a short introduction. So we will ask question to Indonesia, but I don't know if Connie is not there because I wish to ask her question. Now, this is my short introduction. I want to remind that the Indonesian political foreign affairs is based on non-alignment. Since the independence, Indonesia has defined its foreign affairs as active and independent. And then with the Bandung Conference and Belgrade Conference, it is more precisely become non-aligned movement, non-aligned policy. And I just show here the picture of the 5 initiating leaders of non-alignment. But what is the non-alignment? Well, briefly, the country should have adopted an independent policy based on the coexistence of states with different political and social systems, and on non-alignment, or should be showing a trend in favor of such a policy. In 1961, the movement consists of 25 countries. Now it is 120 countries from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe. Europe, mainly Belarus, I think, because Yugoslavia is not there anymore. But what is non-aligned movement? Non-alignment, according to Sukarno, that's why I will ask to Connie. This is the, according to Sukarno, this is I quote from his speech in Belgrade, that according to Sukarno, non-alignment is not neutrality. I will quote, "Our bitter experience teaches us that the old equilibrium is based upon the domination of a few nations over the vast majority of mankind, and within the nations too, the ruling few live their lives of affluence and luxury at the expense of the millions who live in poverty and misery. This old equilibrium is seething with social revolt, the revolt of subjected nations against the domination of other powers, the revolt of the subjected majority against the ruling few. From this point of view, non-alignment is not neutrality. Let there be no confusion on that point. No, non-alignment is not neutrality. It is not the sanctimonious attitude of the man who holds himself aloof, a plague on both your houses. Non-aligned policy is not a policy of seeking for a neutral position in case of war. Non-aligned policy is not a policy of neutrality without its own color. Being non-aligned does not mean being a buffer state between the two giant blocs. Non-alignment is active devotion to the lofty cause or determination to serve this cause. It runs congruent with a social coordinated, accumulated moral non-alignment. So this is the principle of non-alignment according to Sukarno. Now we find this echo after the fall of Soviet Union. For example, according to Samir Amin, non-alignment is not just non-aligned to the two blocs, but essentially non-alignment to imperialism and colonialism. And more precisely, Samir Amin said that non-alignment essentially is non-alignment to neoliberal globalization. So now, since G20 is essentially economic forum, this is the position of Indonesia in the global geoeconomy world. If you look at this table, the GDP according to the PPP from 2014 and predicted 2050, Indonesia is going up from 9th position to 5th, and it is supposed to expected to be the 4th position in 2050. The first will be China, second India, third United States, and the 4th Indonesia, followed by Brazil, Mexico, Japan, Russia, Nigeria, Germany, etc. And if we go to 10 top 10's global economic size, 2020, 2030, 2050, just look at the last column of 2050. It is the top 10 will be China, India, USA, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, Mexico, Japan, Germany, UK. And I put into 2 colors, the yellow one and green one. The green one is China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, Mexico, and the yellow one, USA, Japan, Germany, UK. What is the difference in characteristic? I just follow, if we follow the definition of NEFOS and OLDEFOS according to Sukarno in 1960s, NEFOS are new emerging forces, OLDEFOS are established forces. So the green one are NEFOS, new emerging forces, and the yellow one is OLDEFOS, or old established forces. Now, we may ask a question, do these 2 groups have the same dreams, for the future? And here I will borrow the thought of Professor Mohanty that there will be 2 tendencies, what he called global rebalancing and global restructuring. So which group is interested in global rebalancing and which group interested in global restructuring? Global rebalancing means that economically there will be balance between these groups of countries, but the power, political power, the control of world affairs stay in the same system, which is the West. While the global restructuring means restructuring globally, not only economically, but also in all affairs of the world without any domination, but this is the multilateralism. Now, so who is behind this global rebalancing and global restructuring? And here you are. I define the NEFOS and OLDEFOS, the OLDEFOS as what I call Western Galaxy, and the new emerging forces I call Bandung Constellation, because it is based starting from Bandung Conference. And also, if we look at this, China, India, Indonesia were major actor of Bandung Conference. Brazil, observer and non-aligned movement. Russia was not a part of Bandung Conference, but in supporting Bandung and non-aligned movement. So that is why it is justified that I call this a Bandung constellation. And I borrow this term from astronomy, galaxy, and constellation. This galaxy is based on a system, while constellation based on imagination. So Western galaxy is essentially based on a system of, this is the capitalism, they are united by this system, while Bandung constellation is based on diversity of system and diversity of culture, political, social, economic system. So if we look further, why I call this Western galaxy, the history of Western galaxy developed as a European conquest of the world, genocide of indigenous peoples in America and Australia, slavery, colonialism, two world wars, Holocaust, NATO, Wall Street, Bretton Woods, World Bank, etc., etc. This is in the galaxy of the West. Where in the constellation of Bandung, it is the 5 centuries of struggle for liberation from colonialism and imperialism, with the Bandung Conference as the first manifestation of this struggle, and then followed by Belgrade Conference, and then Havana Conference, and then the foundation of African Union, ASEAN, SAARC, G77, UNASUR, CELAC, SCO, BRICS, etc., etc. So I will stop here. In fact, I want to ask to Connie, who is supposed to be the speaker of Indonesia, will Indonesia be able to stay, to defend its position as non-aligned movement as defined by Sukarno? And for the colleague here from all over the world, what do you think about the role of Indonesia? I mean, what is the global challenge and what Indonesia has to face and what we can recommend to do to Indonesia? So this is my introduction. I'm sorry if it is a bit long, but we can start to discuss since Connie from Indonesia is not there. Maybe Isaac, you want to say something?
Well, thank you. I think we should go ahead. Thank you for the introduction. So I suggest we just go ahead with the list of speakers, and so we can hear Tiguan, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I just want to add, this morning I follow, in fact, the debate with Connie in Jakarta. I mean, and it is available on YouTube, but it is in Indonesian. And that Connie is really, she speaks exactly that this G20, I mean, the crisis, Russia-Ukraine crisis is really the breaking point for a new situation after, there will be before and after Russia-Ukraine crisis. So this is, that's why I speak about this global rebalancing. Yes, we discussed also with Connie about global rebalancing, but Connie did not mention that there is a notion of global restructuring proposed by Professor Mohanty. She just mentioned that there will be global rebalancing, but no, I mean, she does not know that there is a notion of global restructuring as Professor Mohanty proposed. Now, if you agree, we will start with Chiguang. Is it okay? So what do you think, Chiguang?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Thank you very much, Dawes, for organizing this and giving me the opportunity of speaking as a Chinese citizen, not on behalf of China, but and I think this is a crucial moment indeed, as Dawes depicted in his introduction, that tells us, that reminds us that the past 30 years has shaped the world in a particular way that what Taoists would call a Western constellation imagine.
No,
I think
Western galaxy
Western galaxy would
and
imagine.
Bandung
Sorry.
constellation. It's not the same notion.
Yes, yes, I apologize.
Yeah.
And I essentially would agree with that. And I think to today's intellectuals, the most important is how do we imagine the world? In the past 30 years, the Western galaxy provides us with a unique form of ontology that defines the world order by powers. This forms of definition believes that the world peace could only be brought forward by a group or a single power. The union of powers has always been in the back mind of the Western galaxy world order. We can see that from the time of the Westphalia to the time of the First World War, to the time of the Second World War, and to the time of the WTO, we can see that the world order has, according to the Western historical experiences, has always been delivered by a continuation of powers, whether being the power of Romans or the paxi that brought forward by Britain, or the paxi that brought forward by the United States as the post-Cold War imperialists would ask us to believe in. And we're also at the time of this moment facing a fear coming from the global intellectuals that has been drastically shaped by this unique way of understanding or imagining the world future based on the American worldview. A group of intellectuals believes that the destabilization of the existing world order would lead to chaos and destruction of a certain of peace. I think at the moment, the unique role of the global South, or as I would like to call it, the third world, is to bring forward an alternative that has been sidelined by the neoliberal rhetoric. A world order needs a power. No, the experience of the third world countries tells us, or what Taoists would describe the third world galaxy or the Easter galaxy. Based on our experience, the world order has always been, or the world peace has always been shaped by mutual respect and a form of international confederation. The confederation does not listen to a unique or a single monolithic order or power, but instead it relies on its peacekeeping initiatives relies on a collective negotiation and a mutual respect of equality. And I believe this is also the spirit manifested in Bandung Conference. In the 1950s, Bandung Conference argued strongly that in the time of great power politics, the greater majority of the third world people want equality. And this equality could only be achieved through the non-aligned initiative. But non-alliance does not necessarily only mean staying neutral in a conflict, in global conflicts. Instead, as I would imagine, it represents a collective representation. The third world has a shared experience of colonialism, of being the oppressed of colonialism and imperialism. The third world also has a shared experience of living constantly, living constantly under the bottom line of the global economy. And this reality arguably continues until today. So many of the rhetorics in the 1980s and 90s start to hijack this shared experience of global oppression and saying that the third world has lost its momentum and has lost its shared shared goal and its meaning of existence. And this destruction of this destruction of a unified third world initiative has also manifested itself through the rhetoric of modernization and economic development. We are forced, or we are hardwired to believe that economic development only focuses on the growth of GDP numbers. So henceforth, we are fooled by the rising numbers of the majority of the third world countries, believing that they are rising, the rising of independence and political sovereign equals or only means the rise of economic existence. But in reality, the past 30 years tells us that the economic rise of the most of third world countries was merely serving as the provider of the global neoliberal global economic growth that still centered on some of them of the old imperialist power, led by the UK and the United States. So how do we understand the rise of the third world, I believe, in today's world? Embedded the key for us to understand what's the future for the world order. The rise of the third world, or as I would recall, the regaining consciousness, the regaining awareness of the third world unification, provides us with a political momentum at this crisis moment that pretty much caused by the great power struggles. The great power struggles could not only lead to instability, but also we could see that the great power struggle is desperately trying to shape the world order according to its will. The whole idea that China and America are in the new Cold War is precisely serving that agenda. China, in reality, has never agreed or has never acknowledged that it is part of this American world order of new Cold War. Instead, neutrality, peaceful development has constantly been on the table of in the rhetoric of Chinese global outreach. So I think there is a glimpse of hope here for the general third world, for the unity of the third world, for the third world to regain its political momentum in a time of crisis through a good old weapon of the third world people, collective representation. In today's world, there are still major platforms that serves the best interests of the majority of the third world people. The United Nations, the Global Economic Forum nowadays, WTO, has changed significantly from 1990s since the Doha round. So glimpse of hope embedded in the old institutions that has been infested in the past 30 years with imperialist agenda. How would we change that through collective representation within those institutions? What role would China play as not a great power, but a member of the third world country holds the key to that answer? That is fundamental. That is essentially what I want to say in today's gathering.
Dawis, we don't hear you, your mic. Thank you, Kigon.
Oh yeah, Mano. Professor
Yes.
Manoranjan Mohanty.
Thank you. I follow Chikwang's excellent focus on the third world. That's exactly my starting point. And Darwis's very important introduction. Because I think third world was a concept opposing two kinds of hegemonies. And now we can see many kinds of hegemonies. And therefore, sequence sentence that China not as a great power, but as a member of the third world. That's what I would like to see India too, not as a rising power competing with China and joining, the Western bloc, or not joining any bloc, but trying to balance, getting Soviet oil, taking a so-called non-aligned position between on the Ukraine situation, refraining from condemning until the Bucha massacre by the Soviet bombings, by the Russian bombings. And therefore, I think that was a great point. I would like to make the main point about the nature of G20. Please remember, G7 was one club of monopolies, 7 largest industrial countries. G20 came on the aftermath of the 2008 crisis. It was an American initiative to win the rest of the leading economies. A very, very important, I would say, clever initiative. And therefore, from 2008 onwards, till about 2012, I was hoping that the BRICS countries, which are members of G20, Russia, China, Brazil, all the countries, India, etc., they would try to turn G7 perspective into a more universal perspective, or we would say in the third world direction, that G20 would be, they would really represent the G77. Today, G77 is more than 120, you see. Therefore, the third world perspective will be reflected in the G20 forum. But alas, increasingly now we have seen that they are only trying to participate in a global rebalancing process, that without changing the world order, the basic rules of the global political economy, the Bretton Woods system, and the various balance of forces that are built into this system, built into this hegemonic system. In fact, the new talk is how to maintain the rules of the international order. Not only you have to maintain the positive dimensions of whatever international law has achieved, but also transform these rules into making them more democratic. So this is my main point. I think the BRICS countries are, they had the challenge of really transforming or pressurizing the G7 through the G20 forum into a more democratic force. But I'm afraid they have assimilated into the global rebalancing process. They have assimilated into the Western galaxy. In fact, the formulation is so well explained in various writings, but particularly in the essay in the book, Bandung Legacy and Global Future, our 2015 book. And now he has expanded it further. Now, Indonesia has an opportunity. It's not a part of, BRICS. And though, as a Southeast Asian country and, ASEAN country, it has a role, but I would hope, especially if they read whatever the Bandung Spirit Network is producing, representing the non-alignment tradition, the Bandung legacy, and the Havana spirit, then how important it is for China and India to really, and South Africa, and I hope Brazil under a new leadership, or pressurized by the civil society and social movements in Brazil, even the present government in the present forum, which I don't really expect, but let us hope. I think the present regimes have to be pressurized in China, India, Brazil, South Africa, in all these countries. Russia, of course, I don't have any expectation right now because the civil society has been subjected to a lot of repression in Russia today. But hopefully, BRICS will revive its original agenda of global restructuring. That they wanted to change and democratize the world order. And Indonesia has a really good opportunity of recalling the Bandung tradition, the non-aligned tradition, and under its presidency, take up concrete issues, whether it is health, trade, the copyright, the intellectual property rights, climate change, several specific issues, but they have to be part of this restructuration of global power relations so that the monopolies which are controlling the health system, the education system, the communication system, the satellite technology, the AI, all the emerging technologies, the parameters have to change. Therefore, I would conclude by urging civil society initiatives in all the countries to pressurize their governments. And I would particularly hope that Indonesia would take the lead in the coming months to pressurize the G7 countries, particularly in G20, particularly in the post-COVID world, to learn lessons. And in the post-Ukraine world, I think, again, the danger, and we have discussed it in our last conversation, the danger of these monopolies preoccupying that, two blocs, monopolizing world stage and controlling the discourse and policies and politics in terms of competitive militarization of world political economy. I think that danger has to be challenged under Indonesian presidency of G20. And therefore, and I'm glad China has taken some positive stand on the Ukraine issue. Some, I would say, not totally, some, and India also some, not totally. And therefore, let us hope that coming months will see more positive developments from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mano. Perfect. Well, I saw here that Kwan Sin from Taiwan is in. Kwan Sin, your microphone.
Yes.
Yes, very good. What a surprise, because you didn't confirm if you will be there. Very good. Now, we have started, and we start from Indonesia as well as the hosting country of the G20 Summit, and then but unfortunately I don't see that the Indonesian speaker Koni Rahakundini is there, so that we started with China and India. In fact, I expected that the first is Chi Guang from China, and then you from Taiwan, okay, and then from India, and so on. The question is, well, first, the question addressed to Indonesian speaker is, will Indonesia be able to defend his sovereignty, its sovereignty, and its position of non-aligned country? That is our question, because the pressure on Indonesia is very strong. That the United States already, well, the Minister of Finance already said that that they will not come if Russia is invited, or they, including Australia, the Prime Minister said that he will not accept to be in the same table with Putin. So many Western, especially UK, United States, and Australia, they already threat that they will boycott the G20 summit, etc. Well, I listened the debate with Connie by television. It is very interesting that the Indonesian intellectual in general, and they said that don't worry, we have to be sovereign with our country. We do not care if the West does not come. You remember that in Italy, the G20 summit, previous G20 summit, Xi Jinping did not there, was not there. So it doesn't matter if one or two head of state do not come to Bali, that the G20 must go on. That's so. Quan Sing, what do you think?
And please let me kindly remind you that we have to keep the time and be careful. So I will just raise my hand to tell you if you are 2 minutes left, so that you can conclude, and we will have the time to discuss later on. Thank you.
And I have a provoking question to Quan Sing. Is Taiwan, or will Taiwan be the future Ukraine? Ha ha! This is just a matter of discussion.
The answer is definitely no. But I'm not going to talk from the how should I say, the surface of politics. I think these politicians are all playing games. It's like the Taiwan president, Tsai Ing-wen. I've been arguing. She actually has not followed the US line. And partly because people argue this is because Taiwan is basically a US colony or neo-colony, whatever you want to call it. But I think politicians have to as their own game. Okay, and what's on the surface is one thing. So I think Tsai Ing-wen basically follows Beijing line, the secret line directly between Xi and all these, right? Or Putin and Xi and even you know, what have you. So in my view, I think we should move beyond the surface of global politics, but to take the situation, I do believe it's a radical transformation going on.
Yeah.
Okay. And everyone agrees, but I work with different people actually on their stakeholders in Korea, in China, in Indonesia, and one of our friends, Hilma Farid.
Yes.
Now I think he's the de facto the brain of Jokowi. Okay.
Yes, yes, the Director General of the Education, Cultural, the Minister of Education and Culture.
But he's also the shadow head of the think tank, within the president's office.
Yeah.
Okay? But we are also friends with for instance, Mark Turco, who used to be the ambassador to Japan from Ethiopia, and then back to when he was 28 years old, but then back to Ethiopia, now stationed in Cairo as the ambassador, and so on. So I think the picture, one of the conditions is we did this project proposing the Bandung School during the One Belt, One Road, project which we move around, right, including in Indonesia and so on. And so we've been arguing, in reality, Chinese owe the rest of the third world, brothers and sisters, right? Sukarno, Nehru, and others brought Zhou Enlai back to the world historical platform, and so on. And so the Bandung, I think the Bandung project, or Bandung conference in general, that's what David calls the Bandung Spirit, right? I mean, I think this is the moment to seriously think. In my view, there is no better term than the third world to displace the Bandung gathering. People use the global south, but I give you an example, North Korea, China, and so on. They are actually in the north. Yeah. Right?
You mean geographically?
Yes. So the notion of global south also need to be cautiously problematized, including the notion of the West. Like Eastern Europe is part of the West, but we seldom talk about Eastern Europe, which is a so-called post/socialist countries, right? And so on and so forth. And of course, Nehruvian socialism and so on. And Indonesia is one of the really, really, really strategically important sites for the fact that after the Bandung conference, right, Sukarno declared to remove all the Dutch, how do you say that? Colonial tax or taxation. And by the way, I have to say, in reality, David is located in Paris. There are certain countries in Africa still paying the colonial tax to French government, right?
Yes.
So what the reaction from French intellectuals, right? And they're in silent now.
2 minutes now to
Sorry?
the final remarks. Yes.
Sorry?
I said, if you can have, you have.
I thought I have 10 minutes.
Yes. No.
I have 10 minutes, right, total.
No, 8 minutes maximum.
Huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So I guess all I'm saying is the COVID condition create a situation, nation state structure in reality is broken down.
Yeah.
Because the virus and so on move across border without border control, right? And passport, citizenship, and all that are part of the deployment of the nation state. And I think I don't want to say this is a moment to revitalize internationalism, which is also premised on the nation state. And so what would be the term? I don't know. And also, what is the notion of left and right? It's not out of our invention. It's out of, very few countries in Western Europe, right? So I think Indonesia really, really important in the sense that in actuality, they grab the state, move beyond the left and right. If you were there in Bandung and so on, we were there 2015. They work with all the mainstream political, actors, and involving Islamic and so on, religious leaders and so on. But simply because I think largely because the 1965 massacre or 66, right?
Yes.
And the notion of left became a taboo.
Yeah.
But if we were there with the popular movement, actually all the people were in actuality on the left without the need to pronounce that. Okay. So, but also they work with so-called religious right. So in that sense, I think Indonesia practiced and successfully beyond the notion of left and right, but actually effectively grab the state. Okay, so I think, and not only work with Hilma Farid, but Noel Rachman, who was also in the president's office. He was an agrarian peasant leaders, but also agrarian scholar, a Gramscian. Okay, so I think these friends who occupy this, the state positions are being able to, push through certain agenda. For instance, Hilma Farid did the same. Migration policy was changed radically in Indonesia, simply because Hilma proposed that without the funding at hand, we will not allow people go. So in other words, if Indonesia can do it, why not others? So I think this is the moment to ally, not only the intellectuals, and these people are, by the way, by definition, critical intellectual, right? And also the, Cho Hee-young, who's now the Seoul City Education Superintendent, created many popular organizations and so on. And the ex-mayor who committed suicide was also part of the Popular Front, okay, PSPD, People's, and so on. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think it's important to take note of the current shifts in global politics, but we need to move beneath this and onto something else, right? And I believe in the Islamic world, or the Arabic world at large, and especially in Africa, right? All different so-called, I call popular faith rather than religion, right? And all have a story to tell, analyzing what the hell is going on, but their perspective is larger than ours. I think Buddhists, Buddhists much more radical than Marxism, because they contend everyone's equal, right? Not only different classes, but also, plants and stone, the universe. So they have a different view of the universe rather than the world, which is, lived by the people, so to speak, of population. So I think the popular faith now is analyzing the situation. To my knowledge, the Buddhist world, those who are working on that level, contend that in the future 20 to 30 years, this is the moment to shift. But how do we push capitalism to the limit and to determine the future of the world as a part of the universe? This is the level they're working. But people can say this is a completely, mystical and so on. But I do believe, especially in Islamic world and also in the Buddhist, like India and Southeast Asia, the Buddhist universe, we need to take another vantage point to look at the universe and the world, right? And the COVID provides a instance. Buddhists argue that it is because the bad karma of Europe, right? So the rise of the rest, the current situation. So these are Biden and so on. These are paper tiger, right? But we still follow the symbolic power. So we suggest that the so-called spirit of the Bandung is to shift our agenda to ally, the rest, right? But there are also Asians, Africans, and so on inside, Eastern Europe and North America and so on. So this is the moment to bypass the notion of the right and the left and push to the limit and to work together, right? So that's the whole thing. I'll shut up. I still have 2-3 minutes.
Thank you, Guan Xing. Well, I should present.
Well, let me finish one line.
Yeah.
I sent the proposal, which is work in progress, through email to everyone.
Yes.
And,
Okay.
and it's calling for sort of locally grounded Bandung school.
Yeah.
And we did one, and I think Bandung N, according to Noel, is ready to move. Okay?
Yeah.
So I think its basic idea is not only to, build on campus, but beyond it with temple, with church, and so on, with the creative industry, right? and then we can connect together, you know. So this is a moment to move a genuine popular movement.
Yeah.
So if anyone thinks there's something to it, and everyone's locally situated in that sense. Okay.
Thank you.
So that's it.
Thank you, Quan Xing. I should present that for those who do not know him. Quan Xing is a professor of literary cultural studies, and he is the founder and editor-in-chief of Intercultural Asian Studies Journal, the Journal of Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, and based in Taipei. And he is the one who invent the word Bandungism, Bandungism. And also he is very militant in founding school, Bandung School, etc., starting from Taiwan. So it is very contrary of what we know about the relationship between Taiwan and China. So now let's go to Palestine. Mazin.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. I'll try to be less than 6 minutes since we are already over time. Briefly, I think recommendations for Indonesia as leader of the G20 presidency in this cycle. One is to insist that the G20 become more equal and more, less hypocritical. Many countries in the G20 speak of international law but violate international law, and the hypocrisy of, for example, the US saying things about Ukraine but not saying about the occupation of Palestine or the genocide in Yemen, or their violation of international law when they did in Libya and many other places. I think Indonesia can highlight this hypocrisy and can push these countries to become more uniform in their language and in their rhetoric, and more importantly, in their action. With regards to the 3 priorities that I wrote from the website that Indonesia has for the president of the G20. As we know, the G20 is 90% of the world economy. They are concerned mostly about economy. That's fine. The Indonesian, under Indonesia, will be 3 priorities: global health, sustainable energy, and digital transformation. I would say none of these 3 things is possible to achieve without addressing the global challenges which are represented by environmental catastrophe that we are facing. The climate change is really important, and the G20 countries, very few of them are really taking the issues of climate change really seriously to affect change. The failure of the targets that they set and the actions that they put in the COP, Conference of Parties signatures to the Paris Agreement is clearly a failure that needs to be addressed. I'm glad to see China and a couple of other countries are starting to address it a bit more seriously, but there's much more work needs to be done, and we cannot achieve global health or sustainable energy or any of these other things if we do not address the global environmental catastrophe that's coming upon us with climate change, pollution, habitat destruction, overexploitation, and so on. These are things that we need leadership on, and the G20 should put it on their agenda in a serious way, because you cannot have an economy if you do not have an environment. And so that's the second recommendation. First recommendation is to be consistent and to avoid hypocrisy and to support human rights and international law around the world, and not just in Ukraine or whatever. we choose as supposedly global democracies are supposed to push on. And the second one is to focus on environmental challenges. These are the two main recommendations that I would urge the G20 under the leadership of Indonesia. And I'm sure Indonesia will do a very good job at highlighting some issues, but I think they need to focus on existential challenges that face us as people around the world. The third point I would say is equality and justice, economic justice. We have to have a new world order, and the new world order must be multilateral. We cannot solve the issues of Taiwan and China and Ukraine and Palestine and Yemen and Libya and Syria by having a unipolar world in which one country basically dominates the world economy and the world politics and the world military, and that is the United States. Of course, Israel plays a big role because Israel also shapes US foreign policy, and the world needs to understand how foreign policy in the US is made. It is not made based on even US interests. It's based on lobbies that work in Congress, and China and other countries, Russia, need to understand that lobbies in Washington are what shapes US foreign policy. And these lobbies need to be challenged and make a more rational US foreign policy that allows for a multipolar world, a world in which other countries have a say. I think those three recommendations would be my recommendations for the G20 under leadership of Indonesia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mazin. Perfect. It is very clear. And the words repeated from the beginning is changing. I mean, there will be global change or global restructuring in terms of Professor Mohanty. Now we go to Africa. Sifamandla from South Africa. Are you there? Oh, there is a problem. No, there is a problem, no?
He can shut his video and that would allow the voice to be better.
No. What we can do, everybody, deactivate the video.
I'll change this. I'll change. Okay, I will.
Deactivate video and micro. Oh, Sifamandla disappear.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
But we don't see you. You can activate your video.
No, Dawis.
No.
That's the
Let
problem.
him do, yeah.
This makes.
Sorry?
It's better we don't have
Okay.
video so
Only
that
on
we can hear better.
vision.
Okay, Sifamandla. Do you hear me? Sifamandla.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you
yes,
hear me
now?
now?
It's good.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now,
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Apologies. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's great to speak after Professor Chen. I've just used this book, Asia as a Method.
yes, exactly. Asia is a method. Yes.
Teaching a student just last week. It's great. It's wonderful. No, thank you very much. What I want to add to what has already been said is the following. Indonesia is right in placing on the table the agenda that it has placed for its inclusiveness. an inclusive economy, an inclusive social situation in the world, an inclusive political. So boycott is not an option. Secondly, to focus it on concrete cooperation across the world and within the world, with a strong emphasis on developing countries, that the greater cooperation among developing countries. Thirdly, we mark out this intention to focus on rebuilding and strengthening the global health architecture that has been so corroded and undermined by COVID-19, one, but by also very problematic responses to COVID-19, including vaccine apartheid, the geopolitics of vaccine inequity, and so on. Fourth, to push for energy transition and these energy transitions and energy mix and all of that. And lastly, digital transformation. Already in the past 2 years, in the midst of COVID-19, has already indicated that the health diplomacy has become important, economic diplomacy has become important, development diplomacy is important. And it has also said that this has become even more important as what it says, I quote, deepening rivalries between the great powers continue to raise head. Comrades will remember that during COVID-19, we saw massive solidarity among countries helping to respond to COVID-19. But when the vaccines, an amazing collapse of that solidarity, with a few countries hoarding all the vaccines and wanting them to be used on their countries first before being shared with developing countries. Indonesia was very critical of this growing geopoliticization of everything. This us and them, as Professor Chen referred to it, these binaries and all that, was already critical of that. And lastly, Indonesia was already critical of efforts to divide the global south. And all of this, I want to argue, the Indonesian position was not an Indonesian position per se, but Indonesia was playing a historical role of being a mouthpiece for the rest of the G77 and non-aligned movement countries. And therefore, in the context of a global economic architecture that is changing with the rise of new economic powers, but the politics not changing. Secondly, in the context where banks, investment banks talk about an emerging 12 countries from the global south, in the context where they're becoming more assertive and do that. But in the context where non-alignment has never ceased to exist and never ceased to be important, the non-Indonesia, as it runs the next summit of the G20, is going to be important in order to not allow global power, great power rivalries to completely undermine the agenda that is so important, which is an historical agenda going back to the Bandung Conference, which is placing the interest of the human beings at heart, equality, justice, fairness at the center of all the discussion, because the G20 is meaningless unless it is a joining of the old G8 and emerging powers agreeing that the challenges in the world are shared and therefore the solutions must be inclusive. And I hope that Indonesia will stay true to the position of about 133 countries that would want a non-aligned focus of the G20. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivamandla. Very short and very clear. So there are a lot of questions. The question is, will Indonesia be able to take care of this demand of the third world? Now let's go to another country of Africa. Tony, he is based in Rwanda. He is from Nigeria, but based in Rwanda. Tony, are you okay? Your microphone. Your microphone, Tony.
Sorry, okay, yeah. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, I thank you everybody. My special regard to our father Morahanje Mohanty, the guru of Bandung-BELGRADE-HAVANA.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I normally like to take a deviation from the public view, because you see, when you dance the same style with the crowd, you will not attract any particular attention. So I decided to dance, even if it is negative, out of the unison of the crowd, so that I will draw the attention of the people. And I know my brother, as he best understand what I mean. And that is why I particularly decided to give a title to what I'm going to say here, and which is Volodymyr Zelensky's comic diplomacy as a Jewish sledgehammer against the Jews, diagnosing Putin's denazification policy and the imperative of the non-aligned nations' neutrality. We are faced with the problem of Russia-Ukraine conflict being extended to nearly all diplomatic factors of the globe. Even from sports, from the banking system to the sports, now it's gone to the sports, and people are not talking. The third world countries are not talking. And they are now moving to where? They are now moving to what? To the G20 Summit, trying to dictate their own whims and caprices on the people, on Indonesia, a sovereign nation. Interestingly, none of the vocal members actually colonized Indonesia. Netherlands that colonized Indonesia appears to be very quiet, proactively quiet in the whole struggle. And so, and I decided to look at, the aspect most of us have not looked at. And that is, first, the anchor figure in this crisis is a Jew, a Ukrainian Jew, Volodymyr Zelensky. He's not an ethnic Ukrainian. He even belongs to a group that has that is historically a subjugated group in Ukraine. Because when you go back through the history of Ukraine, find out Ukraine has one of the most, has the ugliest history of pogroms in Eastern Europe, Ukraine. Even moving up to 2014, anti-Semitic actions. And then here, you see the country bringing up a Jew to become their president. Added to this is another question we ask ourselves. Why has Israel decided to play the game of a neutral partner in this conflict? Given first the fact that that is the first Israeli president of a foreign country being besieged by Russia. And secondly, given, by the fact, when you also bring into play the strategic closeness of Israel and United States, and by extension, the West, we have not looked, why is it that Israel is not playing a major part and trying, and that is the area I want us to look. And that is the area we expect the African nations, we expect Indonesia, and we expect the members of non-aligned movements to look at when taking the decision. If Israel can decide not to even condemn Russia for the invasion, except for the for the two votings in United Nations General Assembly, if Israel will refuse to send weapons to their kinsman who is the president of a besieged country, then we start to think what is actually behind all this politics of global deceits. And here I try to look at the issue of strategic national interest. That strategic national interest that made Russia to invade Ukraine. That strategic national interest that also made the European nation, United States of America, to invade many nations, to invade Libya, to invade other people, to even NATO, to invade Yugoslavia, bombing. These are the issues. So when we are looking at the issue of Russia-Ukraine war, we should put first of all the issue of what constitutes the interest of those who are playing the prominent role in the crisis. And then what are the basis, what are the basis of our moral judgments in such crisis? Already there are elements of hypocrisy. And for us to know, you remember in my last speech, I talked about the African nations going into jamboree of the first voting condemning Russia, that with time, they will come to realize the truth of the matter. And if you look at the last voting on the suspension of Russia from the United Nations and Human Rights Council, you find that even though Russia was suspended, but if you look at aggregately the voting pattern, you find that the United States lost, the anti-Russian forces lost, because the combined votes of those who abstained, those who voted for, and those who did not attend, there were about 18 nations that did not show their faces, that neither abstained or voted against. If you combine them, you find that 93 votes out of 193 or 195 nations is a minority. So obviously there is a gradual understanding of the hypocrisy of the West, those championing the Ukrainian crisis. And this is where countries like Indonesia will pinpoint their decision in not succumbing to the vile threats of those who are saying that they will not attend the G20 if Putin attends them. On what audacity? As a colonial master, as a paternal emperor, or what? Let us even look at the major issues. Today, even the European countries are in crisis because of this issue of strategic interest. We have, the issue even actually exposed their economic hollowness. They're not depending over energy crisis, whether they will import fuel and gas from Russia or not. These are the people who have declared sanction, flinging, sanction like a handkerchief against Russia. Now they're gradually recoiling. So when we are also looking at the issue of global South or non-aligned nation, our interests, we should remove sentiment, because the West, who are acting as our paternal vanguards, they don't consider morality in their actions. Israel first. Let us go to Israel. I'm sorry if I'm taking that. Zelensky came to Israel address the Israeli Knesset via Zoom. I was telling them, I'm your people, genocide, this and this and that. You should support me. You should send me upon Israel for certain reasons, because Israel, no matter how closely they are with United States, they don't control, United States don't allow their strategic national interests to be subsumed under the strategic interest or global interest of America. And you can see the whole thing going on with the, with the nuclear, discussions with nuclear agreement with Iran and so on and so forth. First, if you look at the sanctions, let us even look at it for those who understand, who are very conversant, with the history of Israel or Middle East. You find that whatever in the global context today, whatever economic sanction, whatever financial sanction that is imposed on Russia today is indirectly imposed on Israel, on the state of Israel and the Jews. Because right from United States of America through the Western, the European countries to Russia, the Jews control the economic, especially the financial networks.
Okay.
So when you are imposing
we have some concluding remarks and then come later on to the topic.
Yeah, we can come back. We can come back.
Yeah.
And in any case, what you said already said also by others in several occasions. So now let's go to.
Let me conclude. I've not concluded. He just cut me off.
Yes.
Yes. So what I'm saying is that if you look at even those who are Russian oligarchs, those who were sanctioned by the West, about 5 of them are Jews. And these are the people who are supporting the state of Israel economically. About 5 of the Russian oligarchs are Jews. And now you're expecting Israel to support such a sanction. That is sanctioning themselves. Okay, even look at Abraham, the owner of Chelsea. He lost Chelsea, and a lot of them lost their destiny. And who is demanding for it is a Jew, Zelensky. And he's telling Israel to now say, join what? Join the sanction. So Israel cannot join the sanction. Israel can also not oppose Russia. Also taking into consideration the strategic role Russia is playing in giving Israel a free hand in Syria, and so on and so forth. So Israel is very, very cautious for economic reasons, for strategic, security reasons, and for that reason, the African nations in particular, and non-aligned nations also in general, should consider taking an approach, a neutral approach based on their strategic interests, and not based on insinuations, moral insinuations of butcher and many people that were killed in Ukraine or not, because Ukraine is not the first. Ukraine is not the first. It's not the first invasion. It's not the first massacre, and we are witness all of them. And it's not the first call for even. So I want us to look at it when considering whatever thing we are going to say further on Indonesia taking the lead as the president of G20 come October. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Now let's go to Europe now. Greece. Dimitris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, tell us.
I had some problems.
And your ancestor, you are grandchild of Agora. So please respect your ancestor.
Yes, okay, I will try. So good morning, good evening.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, yes.
And I hope we will not say good night to our world, because the events which are unfolding now are so dramatic, and the transformations which are taking place not in years and decades, but during some months, are so fundamental and important, and will shape the world for much time, that sometimes, you know, our minds have not, by force of inertia and by force of fear, have not the capacity to really grasp them. There was a French famous genetician, Albert Jacquard, who said that the limits to our capacity to understand the world are the limits of our imagination. We go on debating how will be the world in 20 or 30 years, how to solve its problems, and so on. But there is an even more fundamental problem. Will this world exist after 20 or 30 years, or humanity will finish its existence? Our world was very ill even before the Ukrainian crisis erupts. We have, first of all, the problem of the climatic change, which is, according to scientists, if we don't take very radical measures in the next 2 to 3 years, it will be impossible to reverse it. That is, the Earth most probably will enter into a different climate trajectory, which is not able to be combined with the continuation of superior forms of life on Earth. To address this problem, you need to take very radical steps. I don't see any government now in the world which is ready to take such steps. And even if there was one government or two governments to do it, they would not do it because we have all together to move there. You cannot ask from one country to pay the cost of the green transition and the other to profit from it. Except that it is clearly impossible to address such a problem and all the other nearly existential threats to humanity in an environment of cold or hot wars. You need to have international cooperation. So we had a lot of other problems also before the war in Ukraine erupts. And probably the coronavirus was only one of a series of pandemics which are threatening us. We were on the verge of provoking a huge economic downturn. We have the known problems of inequalities, etc., around the world. So I'm not going to continue with the list. You are familiar more or less with all those terrible problems humanity is facing. By the way, half of human beings are living with less than the poverty limit as it is defined by the world organizations. It is in this environment that it came to be added the Ukrainian crisis. Reacting to the Russian military intervention in Ukraine, the United States of America, their allies, and their satellites have launched what in reality amounts to a sui generis world war against Russia, using all available means, including in particular economic sanctions, an enormous propaganda campaign, the demonization of everything Russia. We have discussed about the Ukrainian crisis in our previous debate, and I'm not going to repeat now all those things or speak about how the Soviet Union was dismantled, about the legitimacy of the borders of Ukraine, or the expansion of NATO to Eastern Europe. I'm not going to counterpose Russian intervention in Ukraine with what NATO did in Yugoslavia and in a dozen countries of the Middle East. Let us suppose that really the West is right in all its arguments against Russia in Ukraine. But there is a question. are the measures it is taking are justified and where they will lead us. In reality, the United States and their satellites and allies, they are following a regime change strategy towards Russia. It's the same strategy they follow towards Yugoslavia, towards Iraq, towards Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Libya, etc. And it is quite open the prospect of generalizing this war to the direction of China and to other states which are not obedient to the American order. The only thing which has not happened up to now is the direct military contact between NATO and Russia, which will most probably lead to the annihilation of humanity. But even this possibility has come much closer because it can happen, a nuclear conflict, because of a mistake, because of a miscalculation, or because of the action of provocateurs, of extremists inside the system, who will very easily create in this situation a pretext and create provoke some provocation. By the way, it is really not very, it is difficult to imagine that this conflict will go on escalating, but it will always remain inside safe limits. I believe this is a wishful thinking, and we are thinking this way often because of our own psychological interests and our own fears, or not out of logic. I remind you that the regime strategy, the strategy of regime change was unable to remove Assad from Damascus, and even in Afghanistan, Taliban were back. I don't think that such a strategy can have any chance of succeeding against a country with the power, the force of Russia. What can succeed is in precipitating a world catastrophe. And even if the regime in Russia will change, it will change most probably to a direction that America itself does not like. So if the situation goes on like that, first it will make quasi certain the end of humanity by climatic change, because it will make impossible to address the climatic change. The second thing, it will provoke a huge economic and social crisis. This is already beginning to happen in the countries of the South, in many countries of the South, but also it will affect Europe. The third thing, you see the demonstrations around the world for the food prices, for the energy prices, etc. In Pakistan, we had even a first energy blackout. The third thing which will happen, and it has begun to happen with G20, is to destroy all systems of international cooperation, including the United Nations. Because if you want to exclude Russia and then China, and then I don't know whom else from those organizations, they cannot really act as international fora. So, for instance, Mr. Biden will make now an international.
Dimitris, we don't.
Your microphone, Dimitris.
Yes, it's okay. I don't know how much did you lose of my sayings.
Just some seconds.
Some seconds, sorry. Okay. So, but if you follow what the Western leaders are doing now, you have the impression that their minds are some centuries ago, when West was beginning its colonial, so to say, campaign in America, in Asia, and in Africa, or when Napoleon and Hitler decided to make their campaigns against Russia. In some parts of the world, we have already very, very important consequences. Oxfam, which is the one of the greatest organizations against poverty, has issued a warning some days ago saying that about more than 200 million people are going to be pushed to extreme poverty and hunger this year because of the consequences of the pandemic, of the debt, but also of the repercussions from the Ukrainian crisis. So we are in a very critical moment of world history. And for the time being, the policy of the West seems really, there seems not any force which could stop it. But it will create such problems even in European countries, and it will create them so rapidly that it will objectively create also the ground to oppose and try to stop it. Try to stop it and use the crisis in order to make a radical transformation of the world in the direction we wish and in a direction in which humanity can be saved and not be destroyed. The non-aligned movement in
Dimitris,
yes, I will tell you now the main thing, Isaac. So when the non-aligned movement was created, the countries which created were much weaker than they are now. Now they have a lot of economic power. They represent even the majority of the world population. And they are not what they were before. And the world needs a factor that will intervene in this war, in this world war, and will say, stop it, and will address, because there will be no victor. The West or the East will lose. The North and the South will lose. All humanity will lose. So it is a huge opportunity, and it must not be lost for the non-aligned movement or the forces inside this non-aligned movement which can move to this direction to take now the initiative, to launch a world, not to wait until October, because we don't have such time, to launch now, immediately, a serious initiative for a peace alliance, to establish peace, to stop this situation. And Indonesia, which has the presidency of the G20, has also a historic opportunity to lead this, to be the spokesman of the majority of humanity inside the G20 club. So I believe, and also our small group can also contribute to this direction if we are going somehow to elaborate on those ideas. I believe this is an opportunity, a historic opportunity for G20 and for Indonesia also, and for the non-aligned movement. And it must not be lost. We don't know if we will have many such opportunities. And by stopping this, we will also be able to lay the foundations for a new world architecture, an architecture in which mankind will be able to survive and prosper. That was.
Thank you. We speak. It was last time during the conference we had that we discussed with Beatrice the breaking points, and I mean, this is something we noticed today in the speeches, that we face a very important moment for change, for radical changes at the global level, and this is an opportunity. So let's hear Dragana now. Listen to Dragana. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Warm regards to all the participants from Belgrade, Serbia. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts today with all of you, and I thank the organizers for initiative and doing all the work to make this happen. Well, the G20 Summit will occur in Indonesia, as we know, at the end of October this year, amidst a significant global crisis. The slow but steady recovery from 2008 world economic crisis was brutally interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic that did not end when the Ukrainian conflict and the Western sanctions upon Russia caused another whirlpool that threatened to sink global food and energy supply chains, recovery, and international security in totality. There were announcements that hundreds of millions would decline in poverty. UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres warned that as many as 1.7 billion people, or 1/3 of whom are already living in poverty, are now highly exposed to disruption in food, energy, finance systems that trigger increases in poverty and hunger. He also said that 36 countries, including some of the world's poorest, mainly in Africa, depend on Russia and Ukraine for more than half of their wheat imports. Some of those countries depends like 100% or slightly less. Wheat and maize prices have risen only from January till mid-April up to 30%, while fertilizers prices increased from 3 to 4 folds. This means that crop yields could dramatically decrease, new crop prices drastically climb, and open door to hunger and malnutrition, especially for young children in most impoverished countries. Inflation was already there as governments of 54 world's largest economies that represent 93% of global GDP pumped into their respective economies some over $10 trillion, which is 3 times more than the response to the 2008-9 financial and global economic crisis. Western European countries alone have allocated close to 4 trillion, an amount almost 30 times larger than today's value of the Marshall Plan. By introducing these monetary policy measures as the first line response to the crisis, of which 60% of the total stimulus came from liquidity injections, they entered the uncharted territory and brought the whole planet there. While results of these and other similar measures remained dubious, the consequences became apparent as rising inflation turned out to be a global phenomenon. Increasing global inflation diminishes purchasing power, hurts growth, causing a recession and slowing development in totality. Developing countries, especially those with high debt, are hit hard, but stagflation remains a global threat, enlarged with the Ukraine war. The UN Secretary General appointed the Global Crisis Response Group to tackle the cumulative effect of these urgent problems, and they recommended some actions for governments to buffer the impact through opening markets and lifting unnecessary export restrictions. The group urges sending surpluses to countries in need and not raising food prices for food supplies, etc. It also recommends governments to release strategic stockpiles to help global prices be reduced. And as Guterres said, this global and systemic emergency requires global and systemic solutions, and the most vulnerable people worldwide cannot become collateral damage in yet another disaster for which they bear no responsibility. It really sounds honest and correct, but global reality gives us a picture in which geopolitics and geoeconomy play crucial roles. Other structures than the United Nations, such as NATO or regional economic partnerships or integrations and regional security blocs, have more significant actual power. The Ukraine war, which is an exemplar and a metaphor for these described processes, uplifted the situation to an extremely dangerous level. Western sanctions imposed on the major European and in many cases major global supply of strategic goods, the Russian Federation, lit petrol on the ongoing crisis, feeding the inflation and jeopardizing global energy and food security. It also emphasized the crisis of democracy, lack of freedom of speech, double standards, and the phenomenon of the first and second class refugees, racial and ethnically motivated anti-Russian violence and hate speech and acts. Just remember the news from yesterday that the Wimbledon forbid Russian and Belarus sportsmen and women to take place. This is really disgusting. And all this severely disrupted global production and trade chains and triggered much of the ongoing food and energy security crisis, recovery, etc. Enormous pressure was imposed on various governments around the globe to impose sanctions on Russia, but only with a partial success. Monetary impact, expulsion Russian financial institutions from SWIFT, seizing other countries' reserves and assets, in this case Russian, but before the Syrian, Libyan, Venezuelan, etc., led to actually de-dollarization and reduction of trust in United States of America and a dollar as a reserve currency and a key trade currency. And then we come back to BRICS and its strategic plan for introducing payments and investments in local currencies, either Chinese yuan, RMB yuan, crypto yuan, Russian rubles recently connected with the gold, Indonesian rupiah, Indian rupee, Brazilian real, etc. That could got a strong impetus from this crisis because new mechanisms and tools need to be found, and that will be beginning stage of the emerging of a new international monetary system that is obviously need as a safe haven for majority of the global countries that could one day, from geopolitical reasons, become victims of such politically driven decisions. Anyway, after all, European corporations will have to pay for gas in rubles via Gazprom Bank, we learned. Russia, India, China framework just put some good ideas into this drive, then South-South cooperation projects, research and development projects in education, environmental exchange, platforms, they all have many potential that need to be supported at G20 country summit this year. And if we look in the structure of these G20, we see like 10 countries on one side that they were not imposing sanctions on Russia, and then 10 Atlantic and the Western countries led a bloc. Are all these projects, initiatives going to create two trade blocs? IMF said perhaps, and they were strongly against it. But then if we see the Eurasian Economic Union and its free trade agenda with ASEAN, with Mercosur, with other integrations, then we see potential for different parts and different developments. We also saw Saudi Arabia and China and their agreement for the next 5 years, oil shipment to China. So we see after 50 years, no more exclusive petrodollars in oil trade. We see yuan as a new currency here. I just want to say, because my time already expired, G20 risks being dragged into a geopolitical battle between world power blocs. Today we had like financial ministers meeting, seeing these Atlantic powers leaving the meeting. That leads us to nowhere. Nevertheless, not all the power lies with them, and leading countries coming from BRICS, ASEAN, and other rising economies must have their sayings and actions. They represent the majority of humanity and those who have been the victims of the existing global system and its injustice, but they also possess creativity and not just morality, but also the real power. And but even maybe the biggest powers we already heard should come from their unity and their determination to give their contribution into reforming the existing system. Well, thank you. If somebody is interested about the position of Serbia that did not introduce sanctions against Russia and did not close the sky for Russia, I'm available for answering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, there are many interesting and important always. Now, let's go, because time. We will come back after everybody speaks. Now, let's go to Italy, I think.
Here I am.
Yeah,
well,
Paolo.
I will be short because many of the previous speakers and now Dragana, they were expressing what I've been writing in my note. So really, I think I can be really shorter. As I'm confused. I must say I'm really confused. And I think the first thing to note is that was necessary another war to change after 75 years, to put in discussion what was established and has been ruling the world till 1945 from now, when the Second World War was still ongoing. Why I'm confused? Because many tentatives have been done in the last decades, starting from the non-aligned movements, starting from other types of movement, and lately from the BRICS, to change something. I am agreeing of what it was saying Manu before, rebalance and restructurations.
Yeah.
It was a good thing in 2006 when the BRICS, they were starting, and we were all expecting that this would have been something really new. But till 2012, 2013, we thought it was going on. After, as we commented in the other Race of Asia conferences, we have been waiting. Nothing happened. And let's see if now is happening something. Because all what has been said till now, the change of de-dollarization, the economic change of economy, change of the main agencies ruling the world, it was already declared by the BRICS in 2006, 2007, and never has been done anything. Very cleverly, United States opened it from G7 or G8 to G20. So to rebalance, but to still continue ruling the entire world economy. But now, first we had the pandemic, and the pandemic has been starting to show that things are not exactly like we were thinking, and how solidarity could move in other ways and so on. Suddenly, a mysterious reason for what this war was starting, and I don't want to make plots on like that, but it looks very strange, when the world was starting to think to the climate change in a more serious way, to a more solidarity way coming from the pandemic, was coming the war. Climate change has been going back now 10, 20 years. We will go back to the traditional petrol, we go back to the gas, we go back to the nuclear. The emissions are already at the level of 2000, of 10 years ago, and this is going on. And all the powers that they were losing control because they were losing the petrol, the cars, the mobility, the model, suddenly everything is going back. So I don't know who is the player, who is the non-player, and so on. I think that we go back to the question that was very clearly posed in the beginning by Darwis. Actually, today, there are two blocks, the old EFOS and the NEFOS. And if we go to look at the voting in the United Nations, the last vote against Russia, 49 countries are the old EFOS, the Western industrialized countries. 149 countries were not voting and 33 were opposing Russia. So the world is absolutely divided into blocks. And I think now is the moment that we go to a new phase, probably. There should be a restructuration of the entire play. We have been repeating this in the conference 2 months ago. We repeated it in 2021, always the same. And we had expectations. Let's see if this time is enough to look at what was showing Darwis in the beginning about the 10 biggest economies in today, 2030, 2050. Indonesia will be number 4. Why Indonesia is not part of the BRICS? She has been asking to get into the BRICS, but was a veto or from one or from the other one, and so on, from keeping the power. Indonesia now it is member of the G20. In the G20, we have all the BRICS countries. They can really play the role and take the a more important voice and representing the NEFOS. They can really oppose to what is going on. Someone was talking today about having not hypocrisy, and I think that is very important because we read all the declarations of the BRICS every year, and they're repeating always say we foster this, we help that, and nothing is happening at all. Now, Indonesia, considering that will be one of the 10, number 4 in 2050 economies in the world, BRICS should enlarge, like Russia has been saying many times, the BRIC Plus initiative that was opposed in that moment because India didn't want, maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is one of the reasons. It was a rivalry about opening and the BRICS to the other emerging countries. If the BRICS have been approving the request they had in these 5 years, now there will not be 5 countries, there will be at least 10, and they will be representing mostly of the world population and of the economy. So what are now, to be short, because all the rest has been said, we are going to a crisis that it is, Dimitris told it, the crisis is climate change, first of all. Second, we have an impact economic crisis already now in all the Arab countries. They have to pay the government for the bread because as the prices of the wheat has been growing to the stars. People will not have bread to eat. So energy black down. So it is, and no one is talking about that. Then a lot of money was expected to be helped by Europe and all the other countries for the third world. No, now all the money is going to buy arms to Ukraine. So Europe will not have money anymore to give to other things and so on. So it is absolutely a moment to take the opportunity to raise the voice and say something else. So the advice, what is to be short, that Indonesia in the G20 should have take the torch and talk about that. Maybe October will be too late, like Dimitri said, who knows? First. Second, to revive the NAM. The presidency of NAM is now in a country that we can say is not Western, but is maybe at half. So it is Azerbaijan to write them to take a position to try to stop the war. I think the war will be ending soon with a war for nothing because things will be like before. Russia will have Crimea that had it already from 2014. We'll take Donbass, the 2 regions that were Russian, pro-Russian already 8 years ago, with I don't know how many thousands of people dead, millions of refugees, 6 of them arriving in Europe, where they will destabilize completely the whole market, and so on, to the result that would have been completely avoided. So really, it's a nonsense on all this. So I think it's time, a part of this, to take a clear position, not Western, not Russian, whatever it is, but a South position of the non-aligned countries and for another way of seeing the future of the world and thinking to the climate change, to the food, to the wellness, and to equality. That's all. All the
Thank
rest
you.
is over.
Thank you, Paulo. I would like to to reduce the heating of our brain with a joke, with 2 words, BRICS. If Indonesia get into BRICS, then the acronym will change.
Yes.
So
BRICS.
it will not be BRICS anymore.
BRICS.
Second point, another joke that you said that all what should be changed already said several times that need to change since several years, but the change did not happen. So what does it mean? Because it is NATO. You know what is NATO? NATO,
yes.
in Indonesian jargon or joke, NATO means no action, talking only. Because of the NATO, so the change did not happen. We just talk, but no action. This is another NATO dimension. Okay, now let's go to Professor Hans Kochler from Austria.
Thank you, Professor Kurori. The question you have put in front of us is what one should recommend to the presidency of the G20 in regard to the forthcoming summit in Indonesia in October this year. I think this year may be the most difficult year for any presidency of the G20 since it has existed. Indonesia has chosen a very meaningful motto for the summit, namely, recover together, recover stronger. That means only on the basis of cooperation and mutual respect can one really achieve that important goal of a robust global recovery. However, this goal is now in doubt because some of the members of the G20 reject exactly the aspect of togetherness, because they insist that one member of the G20 should be excluded from its work. And we have seen how difficult the situation can be. Just yesterday, when the G20 meeting of foreign ministers took place in Washington, D.C. So under these circumstances, I think it is useful just to reflect on what the G20 essentially is all about, in distinction in particular from the G7. The G20 is meant to be an inclusive undertaking. It is meant to be a forum of East, West, and North-South cooperation and dialogue on the major issues of global development. That means in particular in regard to the economy, technology, and environment. And also as far as this is concerned, the Indonesian presidency has quite aptly chosen those 3 main points for the summit in October, namely health, energy, and digital technology. That means development in the field of science and technology. If this inclusive structure and approach of the G20 is really to become effective, one must be very clear about this one particular insistence now of the United States and some other member countries that the work and the operations of the G20 should be conducted on the basis or in regard to certain political considerations. In my understanding, politics should be, let's say it like this, one should not politicize the economy. And in an organization that focuses on economy, not on global politics and not on international law or whatever, that is the domain of the United Nations and the domain of the Security Council. In an organization that wants to improve the economic conditions of its member countries and that wants to promote joint development on the basis of cooperation, there is no place also for unilateral sanctions, for unilateral coercive measures. Those violate the very rationale of the G20, as they do also violate the basic principles of free trade as represented by the World Trade Organization. And one should also keep out as strictly as possible any misuse of the G20 format for propagating political ideologies. This is something which has been the domain of the G7 traditionally. The G7, let's just be frank, is a kind of, has always been a kind of ideological club of the Western world to advance the interests of its member states and to enforce its standards under the aspects, or as they say, the titles of human rights and rule of law upon the rest of the world. And some of the most influential member states of the G7 have always used force to somehow implement their own agenda. And it is mainly also, their policy is mainly about power in connection with economic influence. By the way, as far as terminology is concerned, G20 properly deserves the letter G. G stands for great. The 20 greatest economies of the world, including the United States and China. G7 is quite somehow preposterous or quite audacious to describe the group of these 7 countries, Great 7, because these Great 7 are a grouping without China, the second greatest and maybe some the greatest economy of the world, and without India and so on. But anyway, if we take this into consideration, we should make, or it should be very clear that it is the noble duty of the presidency of the G20, whichever country that is. This year it is Indonesia, not to give in to any kind of blackmail by G20 member states and to carry out its mandate on the basis of the general rules. That means no country can be excluded from the meetings of the G20, and because politics is something that is to be dealt with in other fora. And by the way, several colleagues have already mentioned the double standards. There is a very serious problem of double standards, in particular as regards this insistence by the United States, UK, and some other Western G20 members to exclude one member state. If one follows the criterion of whether a state is involved in a war or in a military confrontation or a violation of the United Nations Charter, many more than just one country would have to be excluded right now from the sessions, and in particular those that demand the exclusion of Russia. The United States has violated for so many times, also during the period of the existence of the G20, has violated international rules, has invaded other countries, has made use of its military power for the purposes of its own national interests. And also other member states at the moment, there's no need to go into detail now, right at the moment while we speak, there are other member states, except Russia, that are also involved in military action that is not in really perfect conformity with the United Nations Charter, and that could be qualified also as an illegal act and as a war of aggression and so on. So it's just to be prudent not to get into that domain. And I think it should not be too difficult, or I hope it will not be too difficult for the Indonesian presidency in view of this very slippery slope of double standards, just to argue that it is better and wiser to include those states that are members of the organization. And by the way, I do not think in such situations of conflict that the G20 should invite non-member states that are the adversaries in bilateral conflicts of its members. Again, in this case, for instance, the G20 would have also to invite, in addition to Ukraine, which is so often mentioned. I do not see why Ukraine should take part in the deliberations. They would also have to invite Yemen, for instance. More I do not want to say, but in order not to be long, let me conclude with a historical quote, which I think is quite pertinent now in this particular situation in 2020. Namely, I would like to refer to the wise words of President Sukarno on 18th of April, 1955, when he delivered the opening speech at the Bandung conference. So let me just quote. President Sukarno said, "Perhaps now, more than at any other moment in the history of the world, society, government, and statesmanship need to be based upon the highest code of morality and ethics. And in political terms, what is the highest code of morality? It is the subordination of everything to the well-being of mankind. But today, we are faced with a situation where the well-being of mankind is not always the primary consideration. Many who are in places of high power think rather of controlling the world." End quote of the speech of President Sukarno. If we take this seriously, and I think it is exactly also the predicament, what President Sukarno addressed in '55 is exactly the predicament of the world right now. If we take his words seriously, I can only say that I hope that the Indonesian presidency of the G20 this year will succeed to convince the member states that they should subordinate all their action to the common good of mankind, and that Indonesia can convince those states or the international community, one could also say, that a development or that economic development should not be sacrificed in a struggle for global supremacy that ultimately no one can win. And with that, I conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There are many important points, but we will not have time now to discuss, maybe later. Now we will fly to across Atlantic or across Pacific to America. Now, first, Brazil. Beatriz, are you ready?
Yeah, Darwish. Thank you. Good morning, good evening, good night. A pleasure to see you all again and to be a part of this important discussion. It's important to be the latest to speak, because with many ideas I have heard, I can reaffirm what my main point, as I imagined before, is. And that means that taking into account what many of you colleagues have said, for me, the big picture for Indonesia as not only as the president of the G20 in this moment, but as the one of the main countries in the Bandung's proposal and the non-alignment proposal. Yeah, I think that in the way also Dimitri put the question, yeah, can Indonesia close the eyes to this present situation and just look for the conference in October? I think it is very difficult to do that, because how to put into practice the idea of a recover together, recover stronger in this scenario we are in, with Ukraine as one of the topics, but of course not the only one, not the only challenge. I may think that Indonesia could have the courage that Sukarno, Nasser, Nkrumah, Nehru had at the time, to think bigger and to take an initiative to call for a peace conference now. We have said here in this meeting, and we have read many thinkers, politicians, theorists, etc., to say that Ukraine is a kind of mutation point. Yeah. If Ukraine is a mutation point, the way in which the war ends would determine a lot about the rules and the shape of the future. Let's think the importance after World War I of Versailles Conference. The shape of the world after Versailles was dictated during the conference and mainly by those who convened the conference. The same we can think about those who convened the rules for after the Second World War, and what is the present legacy. So I think if Indonesia has the courage to say, not as perhaps the presidency of the G20, but also, of course, in this particular year, but as one of the main mentors of Bandung and non-alignment, that the war has to take the responsibility to put an end to this war. It's not the responsibility exclusively of Russia and Ukraine. At least we know that the main actors are not Ukraine and Russia. We know that it's Russia versus NATO, Russia versus US, as a one part of a plan, long-term plan, of course, of the West to destroy any possibility of undertaking of mining the hegemony of the West that they see as a perspective if they don't change the way China and Russia are working together with the other Asian countries. So I think I can't imagine Indonesia just waiting for October to say what to the world. What will be the word in October if we don't stop this hypocrisy of the war, letting the Western country to send more and more arms to Ukraine and to involve indirectly in the war, but not assuming that? I think that is the real challenge we have, and that is my main point. If Ukraine is a mutation point, Indonesia could be the one who puts a perspective of a negotiated way of coming out, in which, of course, the Western part of the responsibility is to take into account. The accountability of the Western part of this crisis, it has to come to be shown by the world. I think that is, for me, the main question. I think that we will have a lack of leadership in this moment, particularly in Europe, but Indonesia could be the one who shows what to be a leader means, to take the responsibility to show that all the community has to come together to put an end to this war. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. I don't see Pedro from Bolivia. So it means that all the speakers have expressed their view, and then we can open a discussion. There are many points, of course, to discuss. There are a lot of things already said. For example, I saw here some Indonesian. Ibu Emi, are you still there?
Yes, Pak Darwis, I'm still here.
Yeah, so
but I have something else to do, so I just
so just Ibu Koni was not there. So you are Indonesian. So a lot of question to Indonesia. Would you like to help answer?
Yes, I don't have any opinion about this, because this is not my what you call it as my disciplines in this area of study. I think Ibu Connie should answer the question, but she's not here at the moment.
I understand, but I'm so sorry that Bukoni doesn't appear. But the feeling, what you as Indonesian, what is the feeling of Indonesian about this situation? Bu Emi, no, you disappear. Yeah, I mean, as a professor and Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, but she is specialized more in gender. No, there is no answer. Now, so we have already passed 2.5 hours. So the question is, shall we continue, or shall we continue just very short time?
Very short time.
Very short time, because also
it's too late. Yeah.
Yeah, and also Isaac will leave absolutely at in 15 minutes.
Yes,
but
because
may I suggest to continue?
Yeah.
If one can summarize the main ideas of we have been discussing, and perhaps as the idea is to try to keep all the ideas into a draft paper, perhaps to be working on for the conference, for our conference in October or November. I think that perhaps we can have a second round working on a paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
yes,
let's start. Well, the words that repeated several times is the need for radical change. I mean, somebody said about the need for radical change. So I mean that's the crisis of the pandemic and followed by the crisis of Russia-Ukraine is a breaking point to global change. So in what way or in what direction it is the change? So this is the words from Professor Mohanty on what he said he called global restructuring, I think. So the change is towards global restructuring. But what does it mean for Professor Mohanty?
I think everybody is aware of what we mean in terms of working towards transforming the hegemonic character of various institutions and practices in economy, culture, communications, technology, trade. All of them have political implications. But what I would like to add is, 2 or 3 very concrete things came up in course of various presentations. One is, for example, the idea of a peace conference, calling for a peace conference. Another is what the BRICS can do. Now, BRICS is meeting, the 14th summit is meeting in China in June. I think Indonesia, even though it's not a member, could make an appeal to start a process from June to October or thereafter. In other words, not wait till October. Right from now, what BRICS should do right now, particularly China, India, and South Africa, Brazil, and because I don't expect Russia to openly accept any proposal yet, but even Russia might, because it's also basically subjected to Western expansionism, NATO expansionism. So the scenario that we are seeing today is NATO expansionism and Russian invasion of Ukraine and the economic war, as Dimitris put it, potential of a 3rd World War. Anyway, so I think that is number 2. What BRICS should do, for example, the motto that the Chinese have announced for the BRICS summit is high quality growth for a new era of global development. That is the motto of BRICS summit in June, high quality growth, quality. For example, this very important transition from quantitative growth, for example, G20, all the figures that, Darwish showed for the G20, they're all about quantity.
Yes.
So the Chinese are talking about, and the world should focus on it. Quality of growth. Growth about what? This is number 2. And then the third thing, the post-COVID world, post-Ukraine world has certain specific challenge in terms of climate change. You can't have sustainable energy transition unless you focus on very, very clear, immediate, yearly, 5-yearly, 10-yearly targets, you know, as Majin put it. So I just picked up these three: peace conference, call to BRICS, and the climate change as three of our concrete suggestions, which should have a cumulative effect of a process of radical change from competing hegemonic systems to some kind of a democratization process, whose prospects seem very bleak today, but Indonesia has the opportunity to give us some leadership. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's the question is that always that will Indonesia be capable to do it? I mean, under the pressure today, I just follow the debate that well, the civil society, the intellectuals, they are in favor of what Professor Manoranjan Mohanty said. But now, now it's to the president of Indonesia to take all this support or opinion or view from the intellectual and civil society movement. And in this term, we don't know yet, but I heard that there is a plan that even there is a demand from civil society and intellectual academic in Indonesia that now the president himself has to take care. It's not to the minister, etc. It has to be at the level of the president, who has to go to speak with President Biden, with the Xi Jinping, with all these power blocks, in order to persuade them that we should get together, cooperate in order to overcome this global crisis. And it has to be at the level of the president to do it. That's the demand of the civil society and academic in Indonesia. Because so far, the president has not involved directly in diplomacy, for example. It is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but the demand now is that the president and the head of the parliament, so the representative of the executive and legislative. That's what I can say about the situation in Indonesian side. Yes, Mano, you want Isaac, you want to say something?
Yes, very short. Thank you. So many insights came from you. Just a question. Yeah, since yesterday, there is here a debate, and in the Toronto Star, for instance, I just want to forward it and then make an observation. One journalist asked, can Canada and its G20 allies afford not to listen? This is how long and how far will they go? But this question remains. I want to highlight the urgency we hear from many of us about what to do till November or October. There are many groups working with Indonesia, with the G20 in order to prepare the conference. We should just become visible with a declaration or something like that, and be part of this process and become proactive with some recommendations with the ideas we expressed today. And I mean, if we wait and give a declaration in October or November, we can also do the same thing right now and become partner even if we are not officially invited to belong to these groups who help and reflect, we can become active partner and support what you are saying, Zaris, in Indonesia, and then send something. So we will not be giving one declaration, but just have some steps before the final summit. So I join the idea and support the idea that we write something or try to use the ways we will use in October to make our recommendation and just help and accompany also like other groups are doing right now till the conference occurs. So thank you.
Thank you. So there's a job that we have to write something. Okay, Paulo, you want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to say something. Thinking to the name or to the well-known and to the role that the race of Asia has been having in these last years, the participation that you had always of the embassy of Indonesia coming to Paris and to Le Havre, and that I think is one of the few forums in the West in which, thanks to you, Indonesia is very active. I think that as everyone is saying that till October, we don't know what is going on. And maybe the G20, like Professor Kochler said yesterday, I'm not coming, he's not coming. I don't think Indonesia will be able to revert the position of America. So maybe they say, we don't come, and the conference will be a flop. I think Indonesia has to move like leader or like a voice of the NAM. Because in the NAM, they were starting with Bandung, and Indonesia politically, and I see now economically, has the strength and being non-aligned on no one of the to take. So I think that through the Race of Asia, through this, we can make an appeal to the embassy that transmits this to Indonesia to take a position to reinvigorate the NAM and to talk in name of the NAM. So Indonesia can talk to the actual president of the NAM, Azerbaijan, that surely he will keep shut up, he will not talk. He's surrounded by Russia, said better I'm closing my mouth. But Indonesia, why not? Yesterday we had a meeting with UNESCO. The other day, everyone is saying declarations at this point that we made before or after, they find the time they want. So Beatrice was saying, yes, we have to denounce the accountability of the West, but at the moment, the West is completely under the media of the West, the East or Russia is under the media of this. So I think the only thing is to try to make something arriving from an independent observer, like it could be Indonesia.
Okay, thank you. That's in the same, your words is in the same sense of the voice of the academics and intellectual in Indonesia, that Indonesia should stake in the values on the ideals of Bandung and NAM and do not care if United States come or not to Indonesia. Because you remember that during G20 in Italy, Xi Jinping, the president of China, was not there. But of course, the academics and intellectual of Indonesia said that, but diplomatic effort has to be done, that Indonesian government, Joko Widodo, president himself, have to speak with the big power, the need to come, to get together. But if they do not come, it's the what's called the show must go on. That's the opinion, the general opinion of the Indonesian academics and yes, civil society movement. I saw here, Tony, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to make a short comment over this. Indonesia, the ultimatum not to come about. In fact, I think yesterday there was a meeting of the working group or G20 working group in New York, United States. When the Russian delegates wanted to speak, Canada, UK, and US delegates walked out.
Yes.
And it continued. Yeah. So the point is this: we're facing, you know, the non-aligned movements. Member countries are facing two dragons. One drowning and trying to, to save himself. And here you see America and the United States and Europe. And then you're now seeing Russia and China being the rising dragon. Yeah. So we are facing a situation where we, as the grasses, normally suffer. We are just watching. It is left for the grass to know whose feet among the two will be softer to match them and take their position. So I believe that, as I said earlier, Indonesia has a duty to prove her sovereignty and not to succumb to the vile threat of if this one is there, we will not come. If this one is there, we will not come. As far as we are concerned, I also don't believe in external forces coming to negotiate for the peace, for the war. The war will settle themselves. Ukraine will be ready to sit with Russia and settle the conflict only when US, Canada, and Britain, especially Poland, decide to stop encouraging Ukraine and supplying their arms. The battle we are facing is not really between Russia and Ukraine. It is between Russia and Poland and the UK and Great Britain. If you look at the trajectory of the conflict, the sanctions and the debate, you find that the three radical people actually pushing Ukraine in this war are Poland, because of his, I made the details in my, in this, I put it in my paper. Poland, Great Britain, and US, and they're using Ukraine to test their weapons against Russia. That is just what I did, without minding the catastrophic loss of lives and infrastructure in Ukraine. So until these people are made to stop and think twice, this war will not end, because Russia, let us first of all look at the moral aspect of it. We have not looked at the reasons why Russia went to the war. They are talking about democracy. If you go into the dynamics of Ukrainian society, you find that Ukrainian society is oppressive. It's an oppressive government against even the majority, against not just the Russians, against even Uzbeks, against even the Hungarians, those who are not ethnic, Ukrainians. The European Unions are not looking at it. So they must also tell Ukraine, listen to what these people are saying. And you can also, let me just conclude to say that nobody among the European nations has asked Ukraine, why did you not implement the Minsk agreement?
Yes, agreed.
Yes.
So, okay, Tony, thank you. Time is running out. Well, so let's end this meeting as suggested by colleague here. It seems to me that we come back to the scenario during the Cold War. At one side, you have these blocs of the West and Russia and China. And then the third is the non-alignment, the Indonesia and companies. So we come back to the scenario of the Cold War. And that is true that now Indonesia has to reinvigorate the non-alignment, I think, because there is 120 members. And the president is from Azerbaijan. So I think Indonesia has to maybe persuade Azerbaijan or to work together with Azerbaijan how to lead NAM in this, to play important role in this crisis. This is what we can, well, I try to summarize, and then we can break down into detail what will be proposed by well, by us, but proposed to Indonesia, what point should be developed. Like, for example, Dragana has said very well about the possible global financial architecture, the new one, post-dollar, etc. That's very important. Of course, the health, the climate change, the finance, it is very important. All this point should be developed into proposal to be addressed to the government of Indonesia. What do you think?
Thank you.
If it is okay, then we can end our meeting. I will try to draft something with Isaac and then to share with you.
Yeah, I think we should divide Darwish and colleagues in two parts.
Yeah.
One part, the more immediate actions
the urgent,
that we can suggest, and then a second part, the more strategic and long-term proposals. Yeah.
So anyway, I will ask you, Beatrice, and also Dimitris, of course, the input, or we can share our thought, and we work together. Okay. And Professor Buhanti and also Professor Kochler, he's always very sharp in formulating statement. So we expect his contribution as well. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Nice
thank
to
you.
see
thank
you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.